Are you ready to connect with nature in a whole new way? Welcome to The Green Scene, your guide to a greener, healthier world. Join Green Corridors Andiswet Dlamini, Duncan Pritchard and Charlene Versveld to explore the wonders of nature and find out how we can live more sustainably and take small actions at home and work to make a big impact.
Welcome back to The Green Scene. Today the topic is water. Water. How do you survive without water? Are we having a water crisis in Durban? The flooding, the droughts and all of it. We've literally had so much water issues in Durban. Today we'll be joined by the usual suspects. Charlene.
Hello.
How's it, Gogo? Duncan.
How's it, Susan?
And our Professor Cathy Sutherland, who is a professor in the School of Built Environment and Development Studies and WASH Research, a development center in the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan. Lovely to be here.
I love the acronym WASH. What does WASH really stand for?
WASH is Water and Sanitation and Hygiene. So it's a centre in the university that focuses particularly on water and sanitation innovation and works very closely with the municipality. So a really interesting centre for people to visit and engage with.
Lovely, lovely, lovely. So, Cathy, what is your background?
I think what's interesting is I'm working on water issues, but I'm not a professor in water or in water science. I'm a geographer, and geographers are very interested in the relationship between people and the environment and how those relationships have different outcomes for different people in different places. And of course, water is integral to all aspects of life, and my research focuses essentially on Durban. I grew up in Johannesburg, I worked and studied in Cape Town, and I've lived in Durban for 30 years, and I just love the city. I love its biodiversity, I love its culture, the diversity of people, the ways of life that we interact between formality and informality. And the thing that cuts across all of that is water. It flows through all these spaces. We encounter it in so many different ways. As you said, you face it in crises. We're always bumping into water, and we're trying to understand how can we work towards improving the way in which we use and manage and protect this very, very valuable resource for all, so that all people have access to water in the way that you spoke about at the start.
Cathy, I understand the challenge of water in, if you're living in an arid area like the Northern Cape. But, KZN, probably one of the highest rainfall areas in the country. We do have our drought periods, but, for several years now, the dams have all kind of been full. Why is there a water problem?
So I think it's a very complex issue, and I think it's something that we all need to understand. As you'll know, the national government has cut our water allowances by 8%, so that's why we're facing water restrictions. And the issue that prompted that is that Durban has one of the highest non-revenue water amounts in the country. At 54% of our water is considered lost to revenue. And what that means is that we're losing water through water leaks, but we're also not getting the full value from the revenue that water can produce because not everybody's paying for water services. And then if we combine that with the idea that you said that in fact, what we spend most of our time dealing with in Durban at the moment is dealing with floods. So why do we not have water in the city? Well, think about the floods. When water falls in our city and in our catchment, the Umgeni catchment and wider, that water just flows very quickly through all our streams and rivers. In fact, Patrick Martel and I, one of my colleagues, we spoke about our city being a city of rivers, because I'm sure you all saw in the floods how rivers and streams just popped up everywhere. Mm-hmm. But all of that water just moved through our city, and where does it land up? We're a hilly city with the kind of topography that just pushes all of that out into the sea. So what people don't see is that they think we've got so much water and therefore we should have access to water. But we've got to manage that water. We've got to collect it. Because we pollute it, we've got to clean it. And then we've got to move it through all the pipes and networks and infrastructure in our city, which all got damaged in the floods, to all the people that like to use it. And so when we look at how much water we can use, there's that issue of having enough water that we can access to put into those pipes and networks. But we're also constrained by the fact that national government manages the resources of water of the country. And water in our country is a public good. It belongs to all of us. If water runs through your property, it doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people of South Africa. And so what national government does is it allocates water across the 6 catchments of the country and then the sub-catchments, and it looks at what the water reserve needs to be to sustain the environment, because it's not just people that should have access to water, the environment needs it too. So we always have to have a water reserve, and then we have to have enough water to support the people in our city or in our catchment. And the problem is that we've been overusing water, we've been having all of these leaks, so we're losing water that we actually have cleaned. And so national government has said to eThekwini, we've got to cut down on our water resources. We also have the big Umkomazi transfer system that's still coming online. They're building the Smithfield Dam. And so even by 2016, we were already at the limit of the water availability. So it's a very complex management issue. And I think people often see the rain falling and they don't realize we've got to clean that. We've got to get that water to people. And that's why it links to pollution and why we need to look after the environment, because the environment will help do that for us.
On my side, I have a big question. We have dams. You spoke about the water due to the topography. Help me, please. Topography, it basically trickles down, then quickly into the ocean. Now, don't we close off our dam walls at some point so we're able to hold the water?
Yes, so it's a very complex idea, because you must remember the first thing that you're mentioning is dams. And dams would be part of a big, large-scale infrastructure that's used all around the world to hold and capture water that can be released.
We've got 4 of those.
Yes. So we've got big dams that we certainly hold water, and Umgeni Utugela Water Board releases that bulk water to eThekwini for us to use. But we don't want to become a society where we just keep building more and more dams, because dams have their own impacts on society and they're large infrastructure. And what Durban has is and KwaZulu-Natal has amazing biodiversity and ecosystem services that can actually hold and produce water for us in different ways. So I think we've got very stuck on the mindset of big infrastructure, big pipes, big modernist systems moving water to all these households and distributing water across the city. And what the city's been trying to do, which is very much aligned with innovation and progressiveness in the environment, is that we are recognizing that if we hold water in our system, so for example protecting our wetlands that act as sponges that slowly release water into the system, then it releases more slowly into the rivers, which goes into the dams. And of course, if our dams fill up, we can't just block them. I'm sure you've seen some of the global disasters of dams that get too full, and you've got to open the dam gates. That's why in the floods in 2022, the Shongweni Dam could not hold that water. They had to open the gates of the wall, and that's what flooded Isipingo. Everything is connected. Yeah. So we imagine we can just have these dams, but actually there's linkages across the whole system, and we'd rather have water held in the system and slowly released into it than just building more and more dams, so getting water from further and further away and the huge costs associated with that.
So, Cathy, big question. Everyone is waiting to hear. We've heard about the water restrictions, the pending water restrictions. Some people say it's already started. Reducing the supply of water to the city by 8%. That's obviously quantity. Do you have any insights into this for our listeners? What will it actually mean for us in Durban?
Yes, it is a challenge for the city, and I think that what we've also got to recognize is that this is a directive that's come from national government, because it's looking at, as I explained, these water reserves and the allocation across catchments. Within the city, our eThekwini Water and Sanitation Unit is having a really challenging time trying to distribute water across the city. And as you will all know, water is not evenly distributed across our city. The quality of water is equal to all. So if you open a tap in Durban, we're all drinking the same water.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, and it's very good quality water because it comes from the centralized system of water provision in the city. But because of our colonial and apartheid history, because of our challenges, the demarcation process where the city grew in the year 2000, and those were the old homeland areas that didn't have access to services, there's been a backlog and a real challenge for eThekwini Water and Sanitation Unit to distribute services more equally across the city. And the floods in 2019 and 2022 increasingly damaged the infrastructure. We also have aging infrastructure like many cities in the world, where all of these pipes and systems are now actually probably close to 100 years old. And so what has happened is that the city is trying to distribute water more equally. So as we know, the traditional authority areas are growing rapidly as people move out into these areas. People value the rural, urban life in these traditional areas where they can get access to land. So there's a lot of development there. And the municipality is trying to provide water to all of these spaces. So while we have these restrictions within the city, there are also challenges of trying to manage this. We also have a sanitation crisis where we are trying to address the issue that our waterborne sewage only goes to the urban edge of the city. So we're working very actively on non-sewage sanitation to try and reduce the water load on that. And so already the city has a lot of strategies in place to try and reduce water use. But of course, this has come as quite a shock to the city again, another shock like the COVID, the floods, the social unrest, where we now have to adapt to this new level of water in the city. already in a space where not everybody's getting equal access to water. And so we have to think about how we as citizens or as communities or as businesses respond to this challenge. Part of it is linked to the non-revenue water. So national government's trying to put pressure on the city because our non-revenue water is so high. But a lot of that non-revenue water is lost to leaks. But we must also remember that probably about 45% of the people in our city are getting access to free basic water. The city has a very strong policy towards free basic water, which is a constitutional right. And so our municipal managers and our officials in eThekwini Water and Sanitation are really having to juggle all these priorities while now having this reduction in bulk water. And so I think we really need to work together in a partnership of communities, the municipality, NGOs, NPOs, the university. We have to come together in smaller social compacts in our areas and think, in what ways can we save water? And in some areas, people need more water. They're not getting enough. In other areas, people use too much water. We need to report leaks. If we can just drop the leaks in the city, that's going to help with this non-revenue water, and then we'll address that 8% deficit. So as citizens, how can we help to shrink that budget that we have for water and then address that 8% drop and then wait for the new water systems to come online?
You know, this is a touching, sensitive issue, and it could get a bit political to some of those. We do have communities a lot in Durban. You spoke about the Lands Act and eThekwini municipality expanding now in the 2000s. But now, is that information being, especially about water leaks and water preservations, being passed into our communities that were previously disadvantaged? Because you find that a lot of the water leakages, not all the time, are happening in places where people either don't know how to report it, who to report it, and if they do report it, will their water, which are usually substations where 20 families use it together, will that water be taken away? I mean, I think a lot of that, if we could resolve that and get that information out, it would really help us. Is that...
That's a very interesting question, particularly the way in which you've placed that question. Because in the work that we've done, I think for me, all people across Durban know that we live in a water scarce city. In 2010, when I started doing work on water governance, wherever I work, people would say, Durban's got so much water, why are we worrying about this? That has changed so significantly. And if you're in the areas where poorer communities live, or where there's development still happening, or in informal settlements, in peri-urban areas, which are the spaces I work most in the city, people have a very, very high awareness of water scarcity, of needing to look after water. Even in the sanitation systems that we introduce, if they're quite water heavy, they say to us, please don't introduce these because we know that we won't always get access to water. So this inequality in water provision is a really serious matter. And as you say, in those kind of neighborhoods, often you'll see water leaks. And it's not because people don't care about those water leaks or they're not noticing it. It's exactly what you said. The system of them reporting it can be really challenging. The municipality has Sizikhala centers. They have a line that you can call. They're now trying to develop an app where people can report water leaks, because they need the citizens to be their foot soldiers on the ground. They need them to tell them. And often it's just a management or a communication problem where people can't phone in. And that's where, for us as a university, in some of our community-based projects, we play a role, because they'll tell us about it and then we'll phone in and report those leaks in those areas. So often you've got to partner with someone else, because, as you say, those communities will try and report the leaks. No one will come and fix it. It's not deemed as urgent. In the areas where people are paying for water, the municipality will get there very quickly, because those are their paying customers and they have to look after them. That's the reality of any kind of economic system. But what we need to do is we need to realize that it's everybody's role and responsibility to try and address exactly what you're talking about. And how do we facilitate that so that we can work in smaller groups, and that kind of reporting can happen very quickly to assist the city, because they also don't want that water running down the road. That's valuable potable water that we're losing, and that's contributing to this 54% non-revenue water.
It's a tough one. Now let's go to the water quality. How can we safeguard this water quality?
Talking about water quality, that's a really important question. And we've spoken a lot about water quantity, but of course the two are linked. Because if we think of the resource of water, which nature provides to us for free, I mean, we all know it comes to us from the sky, it comes through wetlands, it comes through groundwater, it's in the system that nature provides as a very valuable ecosystem service to us. Nature produces water for us. And so when we think about getting access to water, we have to think about the fact that if we damage the quality of that water, or we pollute that water, there's got to be far more investment to clean that water so that we can turn it into potable water that we can drink. And remember that South Africa is not all countries in the world can you drink the water out of the tap. And South Africa is one of those countries. So we really need to safeguard that, because that is at risk and we don't want to lose that. So even my students today, when I left to come here, they said to me, Cathy, just tell them all the students are starting to drink bottled water. And I said, why are you drinking bottled water? And they said, well, we don't trust the water out of the taps. And I said, but of course you can drink the water out of the taps. We check that the municipality still has water that everybody can drink. And that's what we've all got to safeguard, because it's a real privilege to live in a city where you can drink water anywhere out of the tap and it's the same water. So when we talk about water quality, what goes wrong? Well, think about our city. Our city is a city of rivers and streams, of dams that you spoke about higher up in the catchment, not in our city so much, although we do have some dams within our city boundaries, and wetlands that hold that water. And that water gets polluted mainly through human activities. So what we've got to think about is, why are we damaging water quality? What's going wrong? And it's linked to all of the rapid processes of urbanization, inadequate provision of services. I work a lot on sanitation. Sanitation and the lack of sanitation is one of the major drivers of water pollution in our city. Because like you know, in any city in the world, when a sanitation system fails, the buffer zone is it gets released into the natural systems. Okay, that's how these water systems are engineered, and sanitation systems are engineered. So all around the world, there's controversy around that. But of course, with our inability to provide sanitation to all, we're getting that kind of pollution coming into rivers. We have chemical pollution. We have pollution from stormwater drains that are all filtering into our rivers and ecosystems as well. And so if we don't protect our rivers, and then by association our catchments, because of course everything that comes into the river comes from the catchment. So we've been thinking about how do we think about our city as a city of rivers. And my colleagues in the municipality, Sean O'Donoghue and Smiso Bengu, work in the climate protection branch, started to talk about, and Deborah Roberts led this work originally, how ecosystem services and protecting nature in our catchments will actually improve water quality in our rivers. And then Jeff Tooley, who works in catchment management, started to talk about, what does a rehabilitated river in our city look like? What state should it be in? What does a rehabilitated catchment look like? And so we all started to work on these ideas. At the same time, communities were also working on them, because they were looking at their polluted rivers and thinking, I don't want to live alongside a polluted river. Some communities have no choice. The rivers actually have to become the waste management system for them, or the sanitation management system, because they don't have services. They don't want to be doing that. But in many informal settlements I work in, the only way they can sustain the quality of life and health in their settlements is they've got to release that waste into rivers, because rivers will take it away for them. And when we have the floods, we have a big flushing out and we start again. So if you think of how connected these things are and those ideas that I spoke about, we started to realize across our city, if we work in small sub-catchments and start rehabilitating those catchments and our rivers, we'll start having a healthy system that can provide water quality and then improve water quantity, because we don't have to pay so much for the services. And that's called the Durban's Transformative Riverine Management Program, that was launched in council in 2019 and really frames the work of the city to support water quality and water quantity.
Sounds lovely. Duncan, isn't that what we do as Green Corridor in our riverines?
Well, a lot of it is. And, some of these projects, Nick Swan and the Green Spaces team and Muzi have been working on, around about rehabilitating these wetlands, getting communities involved in looking after these areas. And there's an immense value in that.
Yeah, it is. I live on the Palmeet River. So
that's where I work a lot.
Yeah, so I see the river every Monday morning changes colour. And sometimes it's a cyan, sometimes it's a magenta, sometimes it's yellow.
Yes,
so clearly
full
there's
of
someone
foam.
Full of foam's the other one. And when you do see it pristine and clean for a while, then it's like hooray, But again, it's an interesting thing.
Talking about wetlands and these sponges, but what Charlene just mentioned about the state of the Palmeet River. Has any of your research kind of give us an indication of what is the impact on biodiversity in our city?
Of poor water quality.
Of poor water quality in the rivers. The lower Umgeni, particularly the Palmeet. People are always talking about seeing dead fish floating around.
And our beaches.
Yes.
And that has an impact on our beaches, on our tourism. So it has this ripple effect.
Yes, so of course, if you think about biodiversity and if you think of the health of the environment, polluted water is going to impact any biodiversity that lives within a water system, or particularly if you think of all of our rivers flowing into the ocean, affecting the marine biodiversity. But at the same time, it goes the other way around, where if you look at the way in which we protect biodiversity and our green spaces in the city, even at the very micro scale, that actually helps to improve water quality. Because if you think of a catchment, water falls in a catchment and flows through that catchment, often over far too many hardened surfaces. So everybody's paving and bricking up every square corner of their yards these days and removing a lot of vegetation, not wanting vegetation around them. But in fact, that vegetation firstly holds water, it slows it down. It also acts as a retention into the soil, which then filters water. And the more slowly we can release water through these sort of biological filters into our rivers, the cleaner that water is going to be. The biodiversity in our city also protects us from a point of view of flooding. So when we think about the floods that we've had, one of the big issues we experienced is that many of our bridges blocked up with alien vegetation because it has very shallow roots and it gets ripped out. And that's exactly what happened at the bottom of the Palmeets and devastated Quarry Road West Informal Settlement where I work, because the river changed course because the bridge couldn't function. Whereas the indigenous and biodiversity in the city would hold the water and hold the soil. And so there's this very, very strong connection, and it's really a part of the culture of our city of Durban, I believe. And I think as much as we say people don't know about this, wherever I work, people do have an understanding that nature is very much part of the life of our city. And that's why I love the city, because it's not like we live in Durban and we add nature to it. Nature is very embedded in what we're doing. And in work that we've done, people have a very high level of environmental consciousness, but there's somewhere a disjuncture. Something is going wrong, because we see polluted rivers. You see the foam and the blue dye going down the Mbilo River or the Palmeet River. You see waste and sanitation waste going into our rivers. And so we've got to think about how our services and our waste management systems in the city actually support biodiversity, not just people, because in turn biodiversity will support us. And so this connection, both between how water impacts and damages the environment, and that's why the national government protects the water reserve for nature. We also have to protect water for nature, but at the same time, nature can provide such a critical role in supporting us for water quality and water quantity.
I love that, and I think in these podcasts we talk about the ecosystems and how we are so connected, and that just is a really good reminder. Cathy, I heard you talk at the EPAN launch, which is the Environmental Education Network of the city, and what really struck me was that you, despite all this stuff, and we've been feeling the doom and gloom of the rivers and the pollution and everything, you speak with such a positive attitude about the successes. Do you have some that you want to talk about, the successes that you think are examples of where we're heading in terms of it being positive?
Yes, so I think Durban is an amazing city of innovation, and particularly in terms of its experimental governance. And I think what Durban has done is that we've really tried to think about how we connect people and nature and in the local spaces within which they live. And you'll know the Palmeet River, you live alongside it. We've been working for many years in the Palmeet Catchment Rehabilitation Project, which is a collection of the informal settlement residents at the bottom of the catchment and people living right at the top of the catchment. And we might say that the Palmeet River is still polluted, it's still full of waste. But what we've built over the years is that we've built this incredible collaboration. We've recognized different sources of knowledge. We've built partnerships to the point that in 2022, part of this work that we've been doing, we developed an early flood warning system. And that early flood warning system came about because we were looking at people's relationship with rivers and with water. And that early flood warning system, I think in 2022, probably saved 300 people's lives because it actually worked when the bridge blocked up. And now that work is informing a whole lot of initiatives around early warning systems, which I'm sure you've heard about in the news, and we're trying to develop. So what we've ended up building is we've built governance platforms that enable us to see that this is a partnership, that everybody's got to play a role in trying to secure water quality and quantity, and understand how across a catchment we all live in relation to rivers in different ways and understand our own positionality. I mean, somebody who lives in an informal settlement has very different challenges for water. They've got to go and fetch the water every single day that they use and carry it to their homes and then dispose of that water. In someone else in the catchment, you high up in the catchment probably turn on your tap and the water goes into the stormwater system away from where you see it. And so we've tried to build this understanding so that we all see this collective view of why we need to work so hard to protect water security in our catchment. And the best way that we're doing it, and another good example that I work on, is the Kloof project, where they've been indigenizing all of their pavements and landscapes. And you might think, well, that's just Kloof putting in aloes and indigenous plants, and yes, it looks beautiful, but that's a partnership between the community and businesses. So I haven't spoken much about the private sector. But there, all the businesses in Kloof contribute. Every month you'll see their signboards, this business sponsored this traffic circle. And over the years, they've transformed all of the pavements and traffic circles of Kloof from being petunias and roses, which are all water demanding, had to be watered, replaced every year, with indigenous vegetation, which is part of our culture and our identity. And while they were doing that, they fixed up all the pathways and the steps so that all the pedestrians that have to walk on the roads, that don't have the privilege of being in a car, can actually walk through these nice parks and go up the stairs and on the tarred pavements. And that collectively has improved the whole environment of Kloof, which is at the headwaters actually of the Palmeet River. Mm-hmm. So even that suburb doing what it's doing to beautify and add value to the suburb is actually making a contribution to water flow, because it's all of that indigenous vegetation will hold water much better than flower beds of petunias and roses. When the water comes through, it will release it more slowly into the system of the Palmeet River and actually is protecting people in Quarry Road living right at the bottom. So we're trying to show these connections in these different spaces of how collectively we all relate to water in different ways and to rivers in different ways. And most of it is through investing in ecosystem services, in what we call biodiversity, which produces those ecosystem services, and really understanding that nature's our most valuable resource in trying to sustain quality of life, good water, and actually bring a whole lot of other benefits to us.
Lovely. I mean, you've literally just answered my next question on the business side of you and how corporates could actually play a role on their side. But I'd like to hear, because I know, Duncan, you also the environmental evangelist on your side. What can we do in our homes or as individuals to improve the water quality? Just briefly on that.
What really struck me listening to Cathy is we all know how to do this. You know, I live on the North Coast, and a couple of years ago we had that really bad drought. You know, and we were showering, we weren't irrigating the gardens, we were collecting rainwater from our gutters. You know, even after the floods, there was long periods where we didn't have water. So I think we all know how to use water a whole lot more efficiently than we do. But we just don't do that unless we're forced to. We've all done this. You know, and it's those little things that are like, you know, how you use water at home, being conscious of it, how when you're showering, when you're watering your garden, indigenous gardening that doesn't require vast expanses of green lawns that you have to be irrigated for hours at a time. You know, using your grey water more effectively. You know, we were using our dishwashing water to fill up the washing machine during that drought period. So there's all these little things that I actually think we all know how to do it. We just don't, because we're a little bit unaware of how important it is to actually do that.
Yep, we need to do better.
We do.
We need to do better.
I always say to my students and to people around me, because I work in contexts where people don't always have access to water, and I'm absolutely amazed at how they manage with so much less water. You saw that in the Cape Town drought. Cape Town was restricting water to 50 litres per person per day.
That's
I think
normal.
It was.
I grew up on that.
Exactly, and that's normal for most people. So suddenly the huge inequality in water access became visible in Cape Town, where people were really struggling, and well, they did very well because they were facing day zero, but they were having to come down to 50 litres of water.
So you're trying that in the suburbs. They were now carrying buckets on their head.
Well, exactly.
And while in Khayelitsha it's normal, it's like, why are you moaning about it?
Exactly.
We've been living this now.
So I've learned so much from people on the ground in the way in which they try and use and manage water. And of course, you know, there's also the issue, as I said, there's a lack of services, so people are perceived to be throwing waste into rivers, polluting water resources, and we've got to change that as well. But I always say to my students, and I always look at communities, and I always think, what 5 things could you do in a day, even if it's a tiny thing, that'll actually change this water budget thing that we worried about, this 8%, just 5 things. And I learned when I worked on the low carbon city report for Durban is that We think that one tiny action doesn't add up to a bigger change, but my goodness, in the energy field, it certainly shows that it does. And the same is true in the water field. So if you think about it, just do 5 things, and there can be a tiny thing, like just turning the tap off while you're brushing your teeth. Because children in informal settlements brush their teeth like that every night with a little bowl in a bucket. They don't have the luxury of leaving the tap running while they're brushing their teeth. So how can we think about the small things that all add up, so that collectively as a city we can be so proud of ourselves and say, yes, you cut our water availability by 8%, but look how we've responded. Collectively we've solved this problem. Rather than trying to look for water from further away and build the dams you were talking about, let's collectively build it and work together internally in our city, and let's address that 8% that we've had our water cut.
Wow, I've learned a lot. I'd like to say thank you so much, Professor, for coming in. And Duncan and Charlene, I am now going home to be a water evangelist, and I'm going to tell Gogo, you see it leaking, report it.
Yeah.
And she's going to enjoy the whole shebang.
And do those little things.
It's
Yeah,
like, but I already washed in a bucket, so they've been doing it my whole life.
But when I was told to, I turned off the tap, but I've just been thinking about it now, how quickly I reverted back to just leaving the tap running, or having a random bath when it's not necessary. It's just being aware and conscious of these things.
My nephew
really
grew up
important.
in Cape Town during the drought, and he bathed in a bucket, and he still baths in the bucket. He's just getting too big now. He needs a bigger bucket. But you're absolutely right. How many people in our country bath in a bucket?
And it's only 85 Rand. 85 Rand, you can literally fit. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Green Scene podcast is a partnership between East Coast Radio and Green Corridors. Find out more about Green Corridors via durbangreencorridor.co.za.